there's a really fascinating difference between Romans 12 and Romans 13. In Romans 12, what we see very clearly is the commands or requirements for Christians. And it starts in verse 14 by saying that we should bless those who persecute us. Bless and do not curse them. That we should rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep and live in harmony with one another. As we go down into verse 17, it says, never repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. So these clear instructions for Christian living are that we are to not pay back evil for evil. Now, I don't think that means that you can't confront evil. I think we see in Jesus' ministry very clearly that he often confronted evil. One incident that comes to mind was his actions in the temple when he turned over the tables and he confronted the evil system that was making his father's house into a den of robbers. However, he didn't use evil to confront evil. And it's very clear there that he didn't use violence on any people either. He was doing what very much looks like a prophetic demonstration like we see in Jeremiah or Ezekiel or Isaiah. And so if somebody does evil, the Christian response is not to use the same means to retaliate. What it is that we would come up with creative ways that are inspired by God's Spirit, the wisdom of God in the moment, to confront the evil, like what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. And the Apostle Paul says in verse 19, beloved, never avenge yourselves. I mean, that's pretty clear. Never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, and this is a quotation from the Old Testament, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. No, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So the principles that are being clearly taught here in Romans 12, they're also present in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, and in Peter as well, 1 Peter chapter 2 and chapter 3, are that as Christians we are called to live in such a way that is not using evil means, not using the same means that others might be using to oppress us. And so the example here of leaving room for the vengeance of God, for the wrath of God, is borne out in chapter 13, where it clearly says that the governments are God's tools to execute that wrath, to do what is necessary to do. So what we see here at the end of Romans 12 is that the command is to feed the enemy. Now, there was actually a time in ancient Israel when this happened, believe it or not. It was Elijah the prophet, and a raiding party from a foreign country came, and they wanted to kidnap him and bring him away because he was revealing their military plans to his king. And so the people ended up getting struck with blindness when they went to surround Elijah's house, and Elijah led them to the middle of Samaria, the capital city of Israel. And in this incident, what happens is God restores their blindness once they're surrounded by the Israelite military. And the king of Israel asked Elijah, can we kill them? Has God given us this enemy of ours into our hands in this miraculous way? And Elijah says, no, don't kill them. Cook for them a banquet, give them something to drink, and let them go home. And wouldn't you know it, this raiding band never came back. Would you? I mean, after you were struck with blindness and then fed and then told to go home. So this ancient wisdom has already been used, and it's counterintuitive. It doesn't fit into the fight or flight mold that we're constantly told we have to pick between when we're confronted with intense situations. But think about Jesus. Jesus does incredible things all the time where it seems that there are only two options, and then somehow he picks a third option out of thin air. And he's able to do it. For example, when his disciple Peter picks up the sword to cut off the head of Malchus, the servant of the high priest, when Jesus is arrested. Of course, he doesn't try to cut off his ear. Nobody tries to cut off anyone's ear. He was just a bad aim, a bad shot, I guess. So he pretty pathetically misses the guy's head and just hits his ear, nips his ear, as it were. And so in that moment, if we pause the scene, what options does Jesus have? Jesus can either run away and hope for the best, or launch into like a Braveheart scream and take out his own sword and start hacking away limbs. Or I guess maybe a third option would be just do nothing and let them do what they will. So it's basically fight or flight or do nothing. And Jesus does none of these options. Instead, what he does is he picks up the guy's ear. First, he rebukes Peter, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. He picks up the guy's ear and, like Mr. Potato Head, puts it back on his head. And that had an impact on the situation. It diffused the evil in the situation, the intensity of the moment, and it allowed God's plans to be accomplished.